I see somebody, Teresa, has already taken advantage of the chat window, asking whether the PowerPoint will be available after the meeting. Their coworkers not able to attend. The answer is, of course, yes. Everybody will be provided with the slide deck. Everybody will be provided with a link to a recording of this meeting, so you'll be able to watch it in YouTube style. Usually that takes 2 or 3 days to work its way through the system, but you will all get copies of that. So please do follow Teresa's lead and use that chat window as you like. I am finding that the slide scroll is a little bit squirrely, so I'll apologize in advance for some jumping around. We'll try and make it as clean as possible. When we were dress rehearsaling this a couple of days ago, we found that using a PowerPoint deck didn't provide the resolution or the size of images that we thought was necessary, and you'll see why once we get into the presentation. So we're doing this PDF style, which hopefully will be a little bit easier on the eyes for you all, but it's also proving to be a little bit squirrely on the scrolling. So please do bear with us. So as you may be aware, this process mapping training is actually a new thing for us. We've developed it specifically thinking about this consortium and our conversations with you individually and collectively. And so for that reason, we're relying on you for some feedback. This is by no means as tried and tested as maybe we like it to be, and so we thank you for participating in that. And so we would appreciate your very candid feedback as we go along, both for the individual sessions, but probably more importantly after the third session as we roll it up and we sort of reflect on the whole experience. We're pacing to take about the whole 2 hours. But again, this is a little bit fresh for us, so we may take a little bit less. Hopefully, we won't take any more than that. Later on in the session, we'll have some time for you to actually put pen to paper and do some work. And so during those sessions, think back to your grade school, high school, or college experience when the instructor said, "Okay, now work on this," and they wandered around and there was quiet in the room. In a webinar format, that might get a little bit awkward. We might have some moments of dead air, if you will, where we're not speaking, where we're giving you time to do some work. We ask that you take that time to actually work on the elements that we're going to be talking about and do your best to resist checking other emails and things like that. Then it's just time down the drain. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to use this time as well. Also, in contemplating the next couple of sessions, I realized when I sent out the notice, I did a repeating request. So each of the 3 meetings that you have on your calendar say session 1. So that's, of course, incorrect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cancel those meetings, and immediately afterwards, I will send fresh meetings to take their place. So when you get that cancellation, don't freak out. Just know that you'll be getting something new, and there will be materials and login information for those particular sessions. So instead of having a 3-time repeating, you will have a session 2 and a session 3 meeting invite coming over as separate documents, or rather as separate Outlook emails. All right, so enough with the housekeeping. So let's sort of get into the meat of it and what we're actually here to do. So I want to sort of remind ourselves of what we're here all about. And so, I like to go back to the source and looking at the TAC solicitation language that drives this portion of your work. And of course, we recognize that this is but a portion of lots of things that you are working on here. But just a quote from the original SGA, recognizing that many individuals under this program will bring with them learning and experience in the form of academic credit, non-credit, or professional development certificates, and work experience, and they should be provided the opportunity to demonstrate competencies in order to earn credit or even complete certificates. So that's sort of the overarching theme under which we are operating here. Of course, all of you have versions of this in place already. Some are highly developed, some maybe not as much. Some have it sort of down cold in some disciplines and some areas of your college that may or may not be the manufacturing focus that we're looking at in this grant. So as you know, CAEL has spent quite a lot of time in conversations and reviewing documents from each of you and trying to think about how we can, as a consortium and as a state, satisfy this principle that's driving the TAC initiatives. And so from those conversations, just a couple of sort of observations that drive our strategy going forward, observation that there has been concern expressed by all of you that PLA processes may be inconsistent. And when we say that, we mean across the system, so every college has their own way of doing things. But even within colleges, between departments, there may be unique ways of doing things. And so some consistency was probably raised as the single most important concern that you all are facing in satisfying this principle. And it was also articulated that many stakeholders, and we'll talk about those stakeholders in a few minutes, certainly know what their responsibility is in implementing assessment of prior learning, credit for prior learning. So they know what their role is, but very few, if any, people have the bird's eye view of the entire process. And so that sort of issue that jumped out at us really drives what we're working on today in these sessions. And all of that, ultimately, there was a sense that because of that and other factors, students might not be realizing the full value of what they are bringing to the table, and that, of course, is what we're trying to satisfy here. So this is one part of really a three-component prior learning assessment, credit for prior learning strategy within the grant that CAEL is focused on with all of you. One of those areas, of course, is to amplify the manufacturing component of this. So that's another area that we're working on. The ability to enhance the advice that students get and the guidance that they get as they become aware of, consider, and follow through on attempting to earn credit for prior learning. That's another strand. And then finally, this process mapping is what we're focused on here today. Certainly the process mapping, once we get some good process maps in place, that's a huge enhancement to the advisors who are trying to give good advice about something that may be sort of mysterious or complicated from their perspective. And as we deepen the application in manufacturing, having a larger map to look at and consider and then drill down to how we use that broader guidance to apply in manufacturing is important. So all of this ultimately works together, and so with your help, it's not three strategies, it's three components of one coherent strategy. So by the time we finish this, you'll be heading into the advisor trainings taking place in May, and then we're going to be working with the technical deans in July to set forth an approach to drilling down on, we're starting with welding, but manufacturing application of credit for prior learning. So that's how it all works together. But I think of this part of the process as this is our Rand McNally Atlas or our Google Maps or whatever it happens to be. This is going to show us sort of how to get from here to there. The advisors is really the how do you drive the car, and then the career in tech and welding focus is really on, okay, what are our gas stations along the way and where are we going to sleep tonight and all that sort of thing. If I can overwork a road trip and mapping analogy here. So we'll dig into this a little bit later, but some of the things that are sort of on my mind that, again, were raised by you all over the course of the earlier part of the process is trying to make sure that we're aware of the entry points. Where does this stuff start? Who are the people that are involved of the various divisions across the college, and what are their relationships to one another? What are the touch points and the handoffs? How do we make sure that we're tracking things as they go along? When certain decisions need to get made, when do those need to get made, and who needs to make them and how? And then how do we sort of drill down when we're talking about the departments, when we're talking about the skills, or when we're talking about the particular sort of people that we're trying to serve in all of this. So I mentioned, this is sort of part of the broader strategy. And then ultimately, we're going to be heading into additional sort of forms of technical assistance. And so that can inform policy changes, that can inform faculty and staff training, or connection to your partners in your strategic alignment across the system, and then building out the tools and approaches specific to manufacturing that you will all be able to use. So this is really sort of context setting. And so with that, I want to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Eric Heller. And Eric has been a friend and partner of CAEL for many years and brings a great experience across the range of opportunities in making sure that processes are not only are mapped but are implemented well and are improved sort of appropriately. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Eric is dialing in today from West Michigan and has done a fair amount of work with Grand Rapids Community College and other partners in the education and workforce space. And so we asked him to really help us think critically about the discipline of process mapping and how it applies to our task at hand. And so, Eric, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to take us through the next pieces.
Great. Hey, thanks, Joel. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. As Joel mentioned, just a couple, I'll reiterate the housekeeping notes. All the materials you're going to see here today, plus some additional materials you will be receiving in a variety of formats. So in some cases, there are going to be some process maps that are just examples on the screen, and you may not be able to see those particularly well on the screen, but you will be getting those so you can look at them in more detail once you receive the PDF by email. So today what we're going to do is introduce you to some basic concepts of process mapping. Now, we're not trying to make you process mapping experts. We just want to give you the basic tools that you're going to need to use to be able to map out and improve your current PLA process. So we're going to take you through the mapping process step by step, and there's going to be time in between sessions for you to collect more data and then bring to the subsequent session and use that in the session. So it's kind of a step-by-step fashion, the 3 sessions with, of course, the pre-work you've already done, and then assignments in between, and then that will result in an action plan. And we'll talk more about that. But before we start going through this, I just kind of wanted to open it up as far as the pre-work, and just wondered if there were any questions or comments about the pre-work, anything that we can help clarify. And Joel, I don't know if the best way is to have people do the chat, or probably is, right?
If anybody's got a sort of a burning comment, maybe just sort of go ahead and jump in, and if it gets too clunky, then we can go the chat room route. But feel free to unmute your phones and make a comment. Hearing none, okay. Sounds like everybody had it with no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, during the pre-work, these and the 3 sessions and the assignments in between, you're going to end up completing. You're going to be completing 5 different tasks. You've done the pre-work assignment. We're going to use that information to create what's called a relationship map, and we're going to define all these terms and show you examples in a minute. From the relationship map, you will then do a process map. Both of those maps will help you identify issues, and then you'll work on resolutions and an action plan, and then go through and do an implementation to do an improved PLA process in your institution. So in today's session 1, we're going to use that pre-work and create the relationship map. And then in session 2, you're going to build the process map, and session 3, complete your work. So topics for today, we're going to cover in this session first kind of what is a process, and then we're going to talk about what are the different kinds of process maps. And there's really 3 primary tasks that we're going to do today: is train you on the process maps, then help you build your relationship map, and then discuss your assignment for the next session. But this is kind of a more detailed, this is almost an agenda of what you're going to be covering here today. So the first part on the training is really the different kinds of process maps, why do process mapping, how do process maps enable best practices. We're going to talk about the symbols that you're going to be using, and then how you actually use process maps to do problem solving. Then we'll actually go through those step-by-step sessions that Joel mentioned earlier. So let's talk a little bit about types of process maps. You may have used or seen some of these in the past. So it's possible that you've done some process mapping or used process maps, or maybe flow charts. So there are really three kinds of maps that we use in this type of setting. First is what's called a flow chart or a process flow diagram. The second is a relationship map. It's also called an input, throughput, or output map. And then third is a process map. It's also called a cross-functional process map, or in some cases people call it a swim lane map. And you'll see that in a few minutes as well. So let's take a look at some examples. First, you see here we have what's called a flow chart, or just a process flow. And what we've done here is we've created a very simple, I call this it's a consumer buying potato chips. So the flow chart shows you the steps in a sequence, but you really don't get much other information here. You see the truck delivering to the store, the people stocking the potato chips on the shelves, you see the transaction taking place at the cash register, and then the consumer has her potato chips, okay? So and one additional point is that a flow chart or a process flow doesn't necessarily have to be simple. It can be just as detailed as a full-fledged cross-functional process map, but you just don't get as much information about who does what. But it can be a useful tool, and it can often be a starting point to create a different type of a more formal process map. And I might point out, though, that we're probably not going to, well, we are not, as a part of this exercise, going to do a process flow. We're just going to jump right in and do the relationship map and then the process map. So now we have a relationship map, and this also, as I said, is called an input, throughput, or output map. And it gives you a very high-level view of the flow and then the steps. The input is the delivery truck, taking the product to the store. You've got throughput taking place in the organization in the store, where the potato chips are received, stocked, and sold. And then the output is the consumer with her potato chips. In our case, we're going to use a relationship map mainly to identify the principal roles that take place, and that might be at a division or a department level or an individual, but the principal roles in your PLA process. And here's a really important point about process mapping. We probably, once we do that, we probably won't use the relationship map for anything else. After you've checked back with your institution with the map that you draw up today, and get some more feedback and input and make sure that it's correct, we probably will use the map then to create a process map, but we kind of consider the relationship map an interim step, and it can almost be considered a throwaway type of a map or a tool. The next step then, or the next type, is the process map. And in the process map, this really gives you the most information. I don't know if you can see my little arrow here, but it's possible that you can put time sequencing across in this phase line. You've got, this is where they call it a swim lane map. It's like swimmers in different lanes, but you see the lanes are each identified as distributor, retailer, or customer, which you do get in the relationship map. But this actually shows you the sequencing and the relationship between the different roles. So the distribution takes place as the trucker, the retailer, obviously again the receipt, the stocking, and the sale, and then the consumer takes the product. And as with the relationship map, once we finalize the process map and then go through and analyze it and identify your issues, you may not need to use the process map anymore. So again, relationship maps and process maps are often intermediary tools to identify issues and problems, and then they may just be thrown away. Now, I will point out, many organizations, once they go to the trouble of creating a process map, they do find it as a useful tool. It can be used as a training tool for new people that come into the organization, or to retrain people that may be missing some steps in the process. The only thing that's really important to consider if you do decide to continue to use that process mapping tool is that you do have to keep it updated. So as processes change, if you're going to use that as a tool, you want to make sure that it stays updated. So why process map? Why do we go to the trouble of doing this? Well, we all work in organizations, and organizations are made up of people and processes, among other things, but that's really what we're focused on here. An organizational chart can identify how people relate hierarchically and how they work in an organization, but the org chart doesn't really help much with the actual processes. So what ends up happening is we often have processes that don't connect well between the different divisions, departments, or individuals in an organization. And so we call these silos. The organizational chart can be a group of silos, and if you put the silos into this kind of org chart format, you can see that because of the silos, sometimes work doesn't take place properly between the different silos. And so often things work well within the silo, within the individual division or department and the different players, but it just doesn't work properly. And we call this white space. And so you're going to see reference to this in a few minutes, but we have this white space between departments or divisions or individuals where little or no communication can occur, and maybe steps in a process are broken or not working properly. It's kind of like everybody would be sitting in this circle in these chairs that I recall from a movie. They're kind of like cone of silence chairs where, you can't hear anybody else in the circle, but you can hear yourself talking. So you've got these acoustic absorbing chairs. Everybody can talk, but nobody can really hear, so you can't really complete transactions properly because communication is not taking place. So with process mapping, what we end up with is, and the purpose is to bring together a map along with the instructions or directions between the silos or the white space. So you really have both the map and the compass with the map that allows you to properly navigate these processes through an organization. I'm going to talk a little bit now about best practices, and we're going to hit this really quickly. This, process mapping is a quality-based best practice, and it's been used in organizations since about the 1970s. We're using, there are many brands or several brands of process mapping. We happen to be using here something called the Rumler-Brache process mapping, and this has also been around for a long time. The book was first published in the 80s. It's available on Amazon, and it's now in its third edition, which was just reprinted back in December of 2012. So it continues to be used, and it's a best practice tool. This particular brand is used by many large Fortune 500 types of organizations. So I'm looking, there's a couple comments here.
A lot of the comments there so far are about what tool to use, and it looks like we already have some pretty experienced Visio users on the line. There's some discussion about whether everybody in the state should adopt the same tool just for the purposes of consistency and ability to collaborate, and I certainly encourage that. But I had also mentioned that we've mucked through this on Word and PowerPoint and all that sort of thing, and you'll have to each college and each mapper will have to decide what's best for them. But it sounds like the favorite, at least as far as the comments are concerned, is for Visio.
Yeah, and the Visio really gives you the most flexibility, and they really have the cross-functional swim lane version built in as an actual template. So when we get into showing the different symbols that are used, the symbols and pages are directly from Visio. It is obviously possible to do that in either Excel, Word, or PowerPoint. You may not have quite as much flexibility. We've designed this workshop, and I didn't put this anywhere in the script, but I wanted to point out at some point that we designed this with large templates that we've set out for you to use. The idea is to just hand draw your maps, your relationship maps, and your process maps. Draw those out by hand. But if you have that capability of doing it in Visio, that would be good for your organization and a good tool. So best practices. I'm just going to point out here that, again, a relationship map can be a very high-level map. This is an example of a relationship map to set up a export business of medical products, medical equipment from the U.S. to Europe. And so relationship maps, while they're often higher level, they can be used to do quite a bit of detail. And it does show the relationships, in this case, between many different organizations in that middle part. And we haven't really talked about the nuts and bolts of a relationship map, but there are three parts to it that we call an input, throughput, and output. And the input in this map would be the suppliers on the left, and then the throughput is it says Milcare and Partners, and then the output is European customers, the hospitals that are actually in Europe. So it can be done. This is really, this slide is to demonstrate that this is used by large organizations to do business planning. And it's not just for business, it's for all types of organizations, but it can also be quite complex. Here is an example of a process map. And in this case, this is a best practice example. It's a large pharmaceutical organization, a very well-known organization, identifying FDA, Federal Drug Administration practices at this major pharmaceutical company. And note that even though this is processing orders containing unreleased stock, it's actually a quality process at this pharmaceutical organization. It's not particularly complicated in this case. So process maps don't have to be extremely complicated. They can be. I'm thinking in our case, our maps are not going to be tremendously complicated. I'd probably say kind of a mid-level, the kind of maps that we've played with a little bit in the PLA process with CAEL so far. And then here is an example. Now I want to show you three examples of the three types of maps. This is where I mentioned that you may want to look at the PDF file when it comes out. We put together three examples of the CAEL preliminary PLA flow in all three forms: the flow chart, the relationship map, and then a process map. And in this case, this is a process flow description of the PLA process and this actually was outlined with CAEL in a planning meeting for these sessions. And it may be missing some steps, or it may be a good general depiction, but you can see that you definitely have a left to right flow, you have decision points, and you have some outcomes. The next version then is a CAEL relationship map. This is the template that was sent out to you. It was this form but blank. You can see again that you have sources of PLA applicants, and to kind of depict that you're going to be doing this by hand, we use some script to identify some potential different sources, and then what are the different divisions or departments or individual roles that take place inside the institution, and then what are some of the PLA outcomes. And you note that we use directional arrows as well. The other thing to note is that we identify the department, or if you look at the registrar box in the upper left-hand corner of the throughput, we identify the role itself, and then we start to make some notes on what are some of the different steps that take place. Here's one of the limitations of the relationship map is that we're not going to, these different activities may be sequence-based and may go through several different loops in all these different roles. We're not going to do that in this particular version of the map. We just want to identify the role and then all the different steps that role does. We're going to use the process map to depict that relationship when we do the session 2. And then here is a CAEL process map example that you will receive also. And this is actually an intermediate, what I call an intermediate process map. It was actually drawn from a flow chart that CAEL worked with another customer on. And so it's an actual client, but we did the flow chart without interacting with that client. So this flow chart doesn't necessarily identify who does what accurately, because that's not information that's shown on a flow chart. So we kind of guessed, or I kind of guessed at this. So you'll notice in this that all of the steps take place without any activities from the advisor, and that may not be realistic. Chances are it's not accurate, and there are some advisor-type roles in this process. Maybe some of the activities that take place in the registrar line actually take place under the advisor, or maybe some of these other steps occur at the faculty level. So, but this is an example of the flow chart, and it is a depiction of the PLA process. And so the next step would be to take this back to the organization and refine it so that we make sure that these steps are placed in the proper roles.
So this was a big aha moment for me, right? And I think for a long time, a lot of us are very used to doing those traditional flow charts and not taking it to this next level that creates those lanes for the stakeholders. And so what it revealed for me, as we tried to translate from the flow chart to this particular form of process mapping, was that certainly that empty advisor lane sticks out at you like a sore thumb. And so it says, okay, anybody looking at a flow chart would have to be left to their own devices to make a guess or determine, or just sort of a gut instinct as to who does what. And so the result of this says to me one of two things: either that process is not clear, and so the advisor doesn't necessarily have an explicit role or see their explicit role. Either they don't see their role or they don't have a role, each of which is a challenge to work through as we try and specify how this actually works on the ground, and how to make sure that each of those individuals in each of those roles is prepared to play that role most effectively. So whether it's true or not, whether it's accurate or not, it tells us something about how things work and don't work, or about people's perceptions of how things work and don't work. And so this really sort of notches up your ability to see that.
That's a good point, Joel, and I would say that when I was trained on this many years ago, we call this straw man. It doesn't translate quite as well, but I try to use straw person map now. But at any rate, it's kind of something, it's a target to shoot at, and it's often helpful to have one of these maps, even if it's not accurate. Because then, and we've had this happen a lot, where you put this up on the wall, and then people are up there pointing at it and drawing lines on it, and it becomes a great tool to work through in an organization. And you often have situations where you have, maybe the different roles, the people in these different roles don't often get together in a meeting and talk about how handoffs take place. And I've just facilitated a lot of mapping sessions in all kinds of organizations, not-for-profit, churches, and businesses, where you have somebody who has a role at the end of the chart, and somebody who has a role at the beginning of the chart, and they start looking at each other and saying, "Boy, I never realized you had to do all that so that I could get the information, and I can see why maybe I need to do something differently so that downstream when it gets to you, it's going to work better for you." So it's that becomes an aha in your organizations. And so these are really valuable. I had one client in Arizona at one time, and their map was huge. It was probably 50 feet long. And they called it their wall of pain. This was their client process of how they sold products, how they ordered, received, and then sold and installed products for clients. It's a pretty complicated product, and so they drew this process map, or we drew it, and they put it up on, they had this big long corridor, and they put it up in the corridor. It was their process. And people in the organization were free to walk up and down the hall and make notations on that process map and suggest enhancements or improvements, or say, hey, this isn't working for me. So these can be very useful tools. I want to just comment also here. I see some of the comments, and we've talked about this already, that if people are willing to share their maps, either ones they already have or some of the maps that come out of this session, if you don't already have one, this is very fruitful fodder for subsequent consortium meetings, for you to each, if it's appropriate, share some of your maps with each other and use that for conversation, because one person may have solved a problem and another person says, boy, I have this problem. And the first person can say, well, we had that problem, and here's how we solved it, and let me show you how it works in the map. So that can be really helpful, especially in a consortium type organization. That's just kind of an overview then of these process maps. The next thing we want to talk about now is the symbols themselves. And this is actually from the Visio. If you do a cross-functional flow chart, it's called a flow chart, cross-functional flow chart in Visio. You see the basic flow chart shapes and cross-functional flow chart shapes. These this is the menu of different shapes. You see that there's, I don't know how many there are here, about 14, I think, different symbols. We're not going to be using all of those types of symbols in our process map, because we're going to be doing a little bit simpler version. I also want to point out that in the pre-work that we sent out to you, this may be helpful as a follow-up to this session, is that we added a little glossary at the end of the pre-work document. And there's two parts to that. There is a whole listing of process mapping terms that are defined, and then also there is a glossary of some of these symbols as well. So let's take a look at the first symbol that we use. There's an oval shape, and we use an oval shape to depict the start point of a process map or the ending point. And I would like to point out that this can be the ending point of the whole map, which is really important to understand. If you're going to map something, you need to really be clear on what the specific starting point of your map is and what the specific ending point is. But when you get to, we'll see a decision point in a minute, you can have some endpoints partway through a map as well. So you may see this start and end symbol used in a variety of ways. The second symbol is the process symbol, and this is really the workhorse of the process map. This is the process. It's an action or an activity. It's a square or sometimes a rectangle if you need more space. But that describes your primary process activity, and that is placed in the swim lane of the role that process is done in. The diamond is a decision point. And again, this can be used in a variety of ways. Sometimes you have a decision that can be a yes or a no. And if you have a yes or a no, the yes can mean, okay, if the answer to this is yes, then you go forward and there's a whole subsequent string of activities after that yes. If there's a no at that decision point, it also could result, maybe somebody has to go back and take a test again, that no, they did some of their credentials weren't up to snuff or whatever. They have to go and take a test or do a demonstration or something like that. But sometimes a no can also mean the end of that particular flow of that process. So it can be used in a couple different ways. A decision can also describe two or more different paths or choices. And I think in some of those example maps, you might see where there could be 3 or 4 different things or directions that go out of a specific decision point. and it depends on the answer as far as which path is then taken. The last point is a circle, and you're going to see this used in some of the examples. This is it's just a circle. It's called an on-page reference. We're going to use this as a notation in our mapping to depict an issue, which we also call a disconnect. So I color code them in red so that they jump out at you, but you can pretty much do it. I number them and color code them. So again, you're going to see how we do. Then the last symbol that we use is really not a symbol per se, but we use arrows. We use lines with arrows on them to depict the flow or the direction that actions go or decisions go. So now we're going to shift and talk a little bit about how we create and use maps. And this can really vary, but in our sessions we're going to be following these basic steps. First, we're going to create the map. Session 1, we're going to create a relationship map. And Session 2, we're going to use the relationship map to create a process map. Primarily using the process map, but you may start to have some points that come out as you create the relationship map. But during the process map, you're going to analyze that map. And then you start to ask questions. You identify these issues or disconnects, where we use a process to further analyze and what we call categorizing these disconnects. Then you come up with recommended solutions and actions. Then you build an action plan, implement the action plan, and then measure your results. Now, our sessions, we're going to be creating the relationship map in the first session, do some analysis of that map, and then create the process map in the second session. In that second session, you're going to start to identify disconnects and categorize them, but then you're also going to go back to your organization and do some due diligence on that. And then in the third session, you'll start to recommend solutions and actions and build that action plan. Then you go back to your organization and actually implement that action plan. So I want to talk a little bit. This is information that you need for an analysis, and it's important to understand when you're doing process maps that processes can occur at 3 different levels. And we're using a chart here, an organizational chart to depict this, but you can have processes that occur at an organizational level. You can have processes that occur, that's what I call a process level, which is kind of obvious. And then you have actions or processes that occur at an individual level. This really becomes important when you start doing problem solving, because if you have a problem at an organizational level, it generally takes someone in leadership to make some kind of actionable decision to change that. Usually when things occur or issues occur at a process level, a manager or 2 different managers can get together, or 2 different individuals in an organization that have responsibility for the processes can get together and make agreements and decisions about how they're going to change or fix that process. Then issues that occur at an individual level, that's a little bit different. A manager or a supervisor or somebody that person is taking direction from usually has to resolve that issue. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that manifests itself when we start to talk more about disconnects in a minute. But usually the individual needs help getting that issue resolved. Now, this is, I just want to show you an example of a simple map. And this is intended to show some of the different kinds of symbols. They're color-coded. You see that starts and ends occur in these green ovals. Actions occur in the rectangular blue boxes. Decisions occur in that diamond that's a kind of an orange color. And note that in this case, this particular decision flow, the no ends up meaning that the process ends at that point. And the decision yes leads on to further action. That's just one example of how a decision can be used in an organization. So now we're going to talk a little bit about disconnects, and then we're going to relate the disconnects back to that same map. these issues that you end up with are problems. Again, we call them disconnects. Now, it's really important to note that if you have 5 people in an organization that all do the same activity, and 4 of them don't have any problems with it at all, but one person has a problem with it, that means that your organization has a disconnect. It's a problem that needs to be resolved. It's kind of like an engine, a 5-cylinder. I think they used to make 5-cylinder Saabs. That means that Saab is running on 4 cylinders, and you're not getting the total productivity or effectiveness because one person doesn't know exactly what they're supposed to do. So things aren't working at an optimum level, and that's particularly true in a lot, any kind of institution. It doesn't just have to be a business or a manufacturing type organization. Healthcare has been particularly the last 10 years or so invested in doing these kinds of process analysis to improve their outcomes. Once you do identify your disconnects, what we do is we plot them on that same process map at the place that these disconnects occur. And so we generally plot them and then we number them. Now, I haven't shown this in this particular slide, but it's possible that you might have this number 2 disconnect might occur downstream somewhere else as well. And it might even be in a different role. So disconnects can occur, the same disconnect might occur multiple places in an organization, in a chart. Now I want to go back to, we talked about there's 3 kind of levels of process. Well, these disconnects can also occur at the same 3 levels. So, if you have a disconnect at the leadership level or the organizational level, then it's got to be a leader that fixes that problem. And then if it's at a process level, then it's the managers, as we talked about. Then down at the individual level, and this is where I wanted to cover it in a little bit more detail. Usually, in organizations, if a disconnect occurs at an individual level, it's because it's one of several things. Either the person hasn't received complete training or proper training. Maybe they were hired and just got thrown into the maw of the organizational process, so to speak. It could mean a variety of maybe the documentation isn't correct. It could be an outdated document that gives them work instructions. It could be a tool issue. They may have, I've had situations where people had older versions of, say, maybe the Microsoft Office, and there were some issues that occurred because they didn't have the proper tools. That's why, as I said earlier, in many cases, people want to do a good job, but they're prevented from doing a good job because of one of these types of problems, or work instructions, or the training, or not having a proper tool. And that's why, as I said, that usually a manager has to step in and assist the person in resolving that by either getting them the right tool or the right training or the right work instructions. So what that means is, and this is really going to be the work of the 3rd session, is that once we've done our process map and we've identified all these different disconnects, we then move to more of a worksheet type of problem solution. And you're going to get this template prior to the next session that you'll be able to start to use to fill out. But you're going to identify your disconnect by number and then a description of that. And then you're going to determine, what level that type of disconnect is assigned to. Is it an organizational disconnect? Is it a process disconnect? Or is it an individual disconnect? And then once you resolve that, you're going to check it off as resolved. And then you translate that to an action plan in order to get the resolution. And again, that's what we'll be working on in session 3, is that we're going to identify the different disconnects, and then you're going to identify who and when it should be resolved. And I'm sure most of your organizations have this is just an example of an action planning document that we'll provide to you. Many times there are more columns and assignments in your own organizations, and you're free to use anything that you typically use. This slide is just intended to show you how we're going to proceed. We're going to take that pre-work that you've already done. Today we're going to build your relationship map, a PLA relationship, You're going to have some assignments between your sessions. You'll get those by email. And then in session 2, you're going to convert the PLA relationship map into a process map. And then again, you'll have more assignments, and then you'll come back in session 3 to convert that process map learning to an action matrix and implementation plan. And then, not a part of this session, but it might be a part of your consortium meetings, you will go back and do resolution. This is, in a way, a bit of a summary. The different session tools are these process definition worksheets that you receive that allows you to do the information collection. There's a product identification and analysis sheet, an action implementation matrix worksheet, and those will be provided to you. And there may be some other CAEL survey information that is helpful. And then the other tools are, of course, the relationship map and the process map. So we're going to do a quick pre-work review here, but I guess I want to stop and just ask if there are any questions, because this really ends the very quick overview on process mapping that I prepared for you.
So I saw in the comments that there are a couple of institutions who have already embarked on this process. I know when we were together in La Crosse last month, I know Southwest had shared some of their preliminary work, and Louise has indeed sort of shared with me, sort of a drill down flow chart, not only of the overall process but of the portfolio sort of version of it. And I think Teresa had referenced some work as well. And so for those of you who have already got some version of this, are you using the relationship map? Are you using the process map, or is it straight up flow chart? I just want to know sort of at what stage are you at right now? And Teresa, I'm going to pick on you since you've already chimed in on the chat. Is what Eric has shared with you so far, does that sort of jive with how you and your institution are wrapping your head around the mapping exercise?
Yes, I use Visio, and I pretty much am the person who evaluates the transcripts to even start with. And with us being such a small school, I can reach out and actually get with the different deans for approval of actually the classes altogether. My process map even includes, we use Banner, so it includes the Banner screens that each person would need to go to check information, and it goes all the way through to how to notify the student of what has transferred in.
Great, thank you. And Banner is the online system for the courses or for registration?
That's our student system. Most people probably use PeopleSoft. Okay. We're a Banner school.
Great. Comment from Milwaukee, and this was a question that we've talked about a fair amount actually in preparing sort of today's session. But I think if I'm Milwaukee, correct me if I'm interpreting this incorrectly. But so the question is, are we mapping the current process versus the new one? Are we doing the actual or intended state? So Eric, you want to respond to that?
Right. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's a really good point. Is that the vernacular that's used for Rumler-Brache is your current state map is called an as-is map, and the future state is called a should-be map, and it really doesn't make any difference. You use what you feel most comfortable with, but indeed, just as we saw in the, I don't know if I want to challenge your eyes and flip all the way back to that process map, the CAEL PLA process map that I showed you earlier. That's a good example of our understanding of an as-is or current state map. We anticipate that your first version of this map, there's going to be maybe some problems or issues. And once you go back and resolve those, you'll redraw the map, and that will become then your future state map that you want to work towards. And that's what you'll be implementing at that future state. So I didn't make that very clear, I guess, in the training, but you kind of end up with two versions before you end up moving on to the next, that final step is the kind of the current state and then the future state.
Another comment from Milwaukee, and I'm going to ask the Milwaukee folks to sort of chime in on the phone just to make sure that we're getting the question right. And it's about the roles versus the positions, right? So we'll get into this in a minute, but we talked about the relationship map, and those big blocks in that throughput column of the relationship map really identifies divisions, right? So not necessarily individual human beings, but this is the registrar, this is the advising function, this is faculty, sort of, et cetera. So Milwaukee, I think your question is, are we looking at roles and functions versus individuals, titles, positions, and that sort of thing? Is that your question? Well, so maybe we'll go with my interpretation and hope
I would
somewhat correct.
just stay on that point is you can have a variety of roles depicted. In some cases, it could be a division or a department that plays that role. It could be an individual, and you can have both on the same map. I've even done maps where there's a role for the computer system, for instance. So someone was mentioning PeopleSoft. When people may even map that when that there might be transactions between, say, the registrar and the computer system that they'll want to capture. So you might have a swim lane that is a computer, or I've done some really complex maps for bankers where there were multiple computer systems, and we had of course customers on there, but we had we had departments. In some cases there was a specialist. There was only one person that did a particular function, and they were a real specialist. So they ended up showing as a title as opposed to a department. And then we had several different computer systems. So you can mix and match on a flow chart,
Sure.
a process map.
And then Jay, I know Jay, you were on the phone earlier, so I think you've got the ability to speak to it. So you're sort of similar question on the new versus current state as far as the inputs are concerned, but I'm having trouble understanding the difference between current and new. Jay, you want to talk to us a little bit about your question?
Yeah. The pre-work documents, pages 4 and 5, the definitions are almost the same, so I guess I've just got some questions on that, and maybe we're not up to that yet.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that next.
Okay, sounds good.
And then Rebecca mentioned she's already gotten started on this. It's a mix of the flow chart and the mapping, but working on it with individuals on campus to make sure she's getting it right. She is doing the homework assignment between this and the next session. So good on you, Rebecca. You're one step ahead of us. And then looks like Jenna from Chippewa Valley broke the process down and created a map that shows the application process for advisors, and then a more full and intricate process map that she's working on that shows the entire process. Great, yeah. So obviously you could go crazy getting complicated on this, and so having different maps for different levels of the process, showing different levels of specificity that become accessible to those who need to know as much as all that, as opposed to those who need to know only the broad. So you can really go to town on this and getting into the very sort of minute levels of the process. And so then the question is, what's going to be most useful for you, and whether the juice is worth the squeeze to get all that specific. We got to leave that up to you all at whatever level you want to do that. We want to make sure that you have the tools and the assistance to make it happen. So good. Sounds like we're all thinking in the same direction on this. Great. All right, so let's head on, Eric.
Okay, we'll move forward. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the pre-work assignment and the document that you received, and answer some of the questions that just recently came up. So it's correct that well, this is of course your document that you received, and it is true that on pages 4, 6, and 8. You had inputs, throughputs, and outputs that you're currently using in your PLA process. But we wanted to give you the opportunity on pages 5, 7, and 9 to just check off anything that you're not currently using that you may want to consider using in the future, either as an input, throughput, or output. So that was the purpose. And for the beginning part of the exercise, we are using page 4, and what we're going to have you do in the exercise here in a minute is go back to your homework, your assignment, your pre-work, and look at all of the different boxes that were checked, and then translate that onto the map, onto the relationship map template in hand. Or if you have Visio and it's opened up and you want to do it that way, that's fine too. And then similarly with the throughputs, to identify those, and we're going to do this step by step. This is just an overview. And then finally, your outputs. But those pages 5, 7, and 9 are just really intended for you to be able to do some of that future state stuff. And
yeah, so we came up with those lists. We came up with those options really based on the conversations that we had with you and similar ones that we've had with institutions all over the place. We didn't want to assume that everybody's doing everything, and we also don't want to assume that we've fully exhausted the list of possibilities. And so, use whatever language or verbiage that makes, the most sense to you, on all of this. In terms of the outputs that are on the screen right now, we think those are all sort of viable outputs. But, to do this effectively, you need to prioritize and choose. And so we don't want to do that for you. We want it to reflect your institutional mission and your grant responsibilities and your leadership and all that sort of thing. So whatever areas are most important to you, those are the ones that you should focus on.
So we're now going to shift to your workshop portion, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of housekeeping here. We're going to spend about 40 to 45 minutes on this section. It's going to be broken down into 3 15-minute or so sessions, and you're going to do 2 steps in each of those 15-minute sessions. And we're going to end up in the first 15 minutes. We're going to spend about 5 to 7 minutes doing step 1, and then we'll pause and ask if there are any questions. And then we'll do about 5 to 7 minutes on step 2, and then we will have finished that first part of that first 15-minute block. That way, it's possible. We don't want to have just a full 15 minutes of dead airspace. But if anybody has any specific questions at any point in time, if you're having any kind of problems, you can either do the chat or we can have you unmute and ask the question. We can answer those questions. So what we've got here, these are the 6 steps. These should be numbered actually, but we're going to review all the inputs, throughputs, and outputs from your pre-work and the survey. Then you're going to transfer the appropriate inputs from pre-work to the PLA relationship map template. Those are the first 2 steps. That'll be the first 15 minutes. Then the second 15 minutes or so, you're going to transfer the appropriate throughputs. That's the different divisions or roles to the relationship map. And then you're going to transfer the outputs or outcomes to the relationship map. And then the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to add directional arrows to your relationship map. And then in each of the big boxes in the throughput, you're going to start to just list out some of the actions that take place under that role. So now you're going to start with your blank relationship map, which looks like this. And we want to ask you to go ahead and that's step 1. So we've got step 1. We want you to transfer your inputs. These are your current inputs to those sources of PLA applicants. And we'll just spend a couple minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. This shouldn't be hard or take too long, but if you have any questions, let us know, and we'll check in about 4 minutes to see if everybody's completed that, and then we'll move forward.
I think hearing no objections, we'll go with that. I don't have any music to put on right now, so yeah. Oh, and you don't want me to sing, that's for sure. So go ahead and start transferring some of that, stuff from your chart onto the map template that you've printed out.
And here's sort of what that might look like. We've just done a cutout of that portion of the map for you. Joel, I see we have a question from Jenna about double counting, and I think I understand that, but it might be better for one of the CAEL folks to talk about that, because you'll probably have some specific examples.
In terms of the the output concern, is that, Jenna, was that?
Yeah, I think that's where that was. I just wasn't really sure what it was when I was doing my homework last night.
Sure, fair enough. So really what I was getting at on that one is one of the standards of quality that CAEL has put out there is monitoring of the awarding of credit to make sure that folks are not getting credit twice for the same learning. So the way that can manifest itself in a PLA process is if somebody comes in and says, I'm a really good writer, I shouldn't have to take Comp 1, and they demonstrate, through a writing sample or through a test or something like that, they hand in a composition, the professor says, yes, you're writing at the level that someone who's finished with Comp 1 should have, so we're going to give you credit for that, and then that person should not therefore then take Comp 1 and get credit for having taken the class as well as having met the objectives of that same class in some other way. So that's one of the standards that we want to sort of make sure is out there, that they're not getting credit twice for the same learning, even if it's demonstrated in both the traditional and less traditional prior assessment of their prior learning ways.
All right, got it. I just wasn't sure. I needed that clarification, so I appreciate it, Joel. Thank you.
Sure thing. So we put out there, some sources that we've got on our mind. So, your adult programs, sort of general open enrollment, whether you're, visiting trade-impacted companies and participating in trade events or job fairs are the examples, that are on here. I'm especially curious when you think about sources of people who are appropriate candidates for credit for prior learning. What are you filling in that other column? Are there any sources that you're working on or that you have in mind that we didn't put up among the examples there?
I think, Joel, this is Bridget Cumbier at Nicolay. I was kind of thinking about some of the things we've been doing with Project Lead the Way. We've decided as a system to articulate that credit from our high school students that are entering into programs.
So a dedicated secondary program would be another source. You're not sort of squarely in the TACT principles, right? Because those, by definition, are not folks who have, or I shouldn't say by definition, who are probably not going to be also employees of trade-impacted companies. But nonetheless, the method makes sense.
We're actually at 11:46, so we spent about 6 minutes on this, and I would guess that some people already have a process map, so they probably don't need to even do this. But if you don't, I'm guessing that this is pretty straightforward. You may have some different examples than the ones that we provided, but has everybody pretty much completed this first step?
And by the way, Eric's on Eastern time. It's 10:46 for us, so don't worry about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah, that lake adds some distance there in time zone. Thanks, Joel. The next section is that we're going to transfer just the titles, the throughput titles, not fill in the boxes yet. So it's going to be this portion. So you're going to take the high-level throughputs and enter them into the different boxes. And I guess if you don't have enough boxes, you just would maybe pencil in some more boxes, and then we can clean the map up later on. We can maybe provide you with a different template that gives you more, or if you're capable of doing your own Visio. So let's just spend
we've got some Visio experts here who are maybe one step ahead of us on that.
Yeah, so let's just spend about 3 or 4 minutes on this step here.
So I guess a similar question from the earlier step. We've listed some usual suspects here, and I think in all of our discussions with you, these are roles and divisions that that get mentioned. Has anybody got anything that you would call an unusual suspect, or something that's maybe a little bit unique that you're putting into your throughput section? So Jenna says the credit for prior learning coordinator as an other, and God bless you for having such a thing. We would hope every college would have one, and also deans and department chairs. So certainly related, I guess, to the faculty question, on the academic side, but different than the actual instructors and the actual faculty and professors themselves, but the folks who are sort of atop that particular discipline, department, those kinds of leader roles, playing a somewhat different role and operating a different function than the instructor themselves and the faculty themselves. Great point, Jenna. Thank you.
What was the first one that you mentioned, Joel, just so I can record?
So Jenna and others on the call have titles something like credit for prior learning coordinator, somebody whose job it is to bird dog this at their individual institutions. That is not a ubiquitous title that we see, and so certainly, in this grant and in this consortium, we are pleased to see the institutions putting resources, into having a role like that, whose job it is to sort of educational staff other, something like that.
Yes. So we're at about 6 minutes or so on this task. I'm guessing that we probably, these are the pretty basic tasks. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at capturing your outputs, because again, this is pretty straightforward transcription. Then we're going to go in and do the details and the lines as the last two steps. So let's spend about maybe 7 or 8 minutes to put your PLA outcomes on your map, and then we'll check back with you in a few minutes.
I think on this one, there's definitely a natural instinct to list every problem to be solved, or list every possible outcome that one could have. And certainly at this stage of the game, I think there's a lot of merit to that. But when it comes down to directing resources or adjusting processes, or really analyzing the disconnects and all that sort of thing, there may be some prioritization that's needed. And so do be thinking about that, which outcome you feel represents perhaps the greatest opportunity, or which outcome may be furthest away from you right now and therefore more important to work on, versus it's so far away that we're not going to get there for a long time, and so is our energy best directed elsewhere. So there's all sorts of different ways to think about what's the right way to go. And so do be thinking about which outcomes you want to focus on early and often. So I guess similar question on on this one. As you sort of make these lists, do you feel like you feel very strongly about what's at the top of the list, or are there outcomes that you're thinking about that we didn't put up on the options? who feels like they are most certain of the type of outcome that they are prioritizing?
Joel?
Mm-hmm.
It's Rebecca at Western.
Hey.
Talking about outcomes, I just want to throw it out there that the 10 standards that CAEL puts out guide all of our outcomes. They are the big picture, but we are breaking them down to whomever they happen to apply to, whether it's the registrar's office or teachers or whomever. So for anybody that needs a big picture guide, I would definitely suggest using those 10 standards.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Can you give us an example of how you've broken that down? Maybe just one way that's happening?
Just one. Sure. Right now we charge a fee for our challenge exams and for credit for work experience, and it has gone into the black hole of the university. Starting in July the 1st in our new fiscal year, that fee is now going to be earned for the assessor. So the instructor who actually evaluates, assesses, or meets with the student, or however that's set up, will now have that fee. So we can now tie the fee to an actual service, so it doesn't look like we are selling credits.
Great. So yeah, that's one of the principles, is that any fees should be for the assessment service, not for the credit that's awarded. Right. The more money you give us, the more credit you get. You don't want to be in that business.
Right.
And I think, and I'm interested in Eric's opinion on this, so that sort of raises a question. So when you first started talking, Rebecca, I'm recalling a couple of the conversations that we had early in the process where some of you mentioned, faculty don't get very excited to be doing this.
Until they find out that they can get paid for it.
Well, right. So you could say, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, sort of one of the disconnects could be, in that center throughput column, faculty and instructors have a role to do the assessment, but the disconnect is that they don't have an incentive to do it, right? So that could be a disconnect. You are solving a disconnect by directing, some remuneration to them for the work that they are doing, right? So that's sort of a process issue. It's identifying and addressing a disconnect. I would say that outcome is inward focused, right? So how can we as an institution do this better? There is a relationship between that and therefore more people having access to or being encouraged to do the process. It could have an impact on the speed with which prior learning gets assessed by faculty. And so it has implications both internally. The outcome is an internal process improvement, but the outcome is also hopefully going to turn into a sort of either volume or awareness benefit on the part of the students.
Right.
Right. No, it's a great example.
And Joel, that brings up a really excellent point, and people can look at that if they'd be interested in getting that book from Amazon on the process mapping. There's a lot more on this, but in that classic process mapping, and we're not necessarily doing that in this workshop, but it is really important to set a whole series of measures, and for every internal measure, there should be an external measure and vice versa. So what you talked about is spot on as far as, really good, impeccable process improvement is having those internal and external measures identified. And it's the critical ones. I mean, you don't need to do it on every single thing. But there's some really
Eric,
good examples.
to a similar point, so we talk about that, that particular disconnect. On one level, it seems to me it's an individual sort of behavioral issue, right? Does the faculty want to, or will they, expeditiously sort of perform this function? But what Rebecca's talking about is a sort of an organizational decision. It's a policy decision, right? So where we are on that, organizational process or individual disconnect, would you put it in both places? Is it one or the other?
Yeah, actually, that's another good point, Joel, is that some disconnects can be at multiple levels, and so you have to write a remediation for both levels. So it may be a sequenced resolution. So the first thing is to get the administration or leadership to make a decision on policy, and then you have to go through and implement it either at a process or individual level. So that's a really good point, and we would be covering that next week in the process mapping. Is that sometimes these disconnects get identified at multiple levels.
So Teresa states that the process map is only applying to transcript evaluation. Teresa, are you talking about transcript, evaluating transfer? So transcripts from another institution and your institution evaluating that? Is that what you mean?
Yes, when that flowchart just refers to when admissions gives me transcripts from any other college. So if we have a student coming in from UROC, that process just applies to how we transfer in credit. As far as the work experience credit or the prior learning assessment, those are done primarily within the division. A lot of students take the initiative to go to the dean or instructor and say, hey, I've worked as a welder for such and such years. What kind of credit can I, receive? So as far as what we talk about here as PLA, I'm thinking of more like the work experience credit. We also do test outs, and I thought I heard one of the other people say that they have a fee for that. Our test outs is the student actually has to register in the class, and then they can test out of it. So they pay for the entire class.
Interesting. Okay.
So so we have transfer credit, we have substitutions, we have work experience, and we have test out.
And so I could imagine different process documents for each of those sub-processes that would all sort of fall under this broad heading. And as you think about what you're going to do between now and when we're sort of together next, if you've got the time to sort of do two versions of it, I would perhaps suggest do one that's easy, that that the organization sort of has down pat. That should be pretty straightforward. And then pick one that's a little bit harder, murkier, more complicated, or what have you, to give yourself the experience of doing both if you have the wherewithal to do that, because they are going to be different. And transfer, I think, again, from remembering our conversations with each of you, I think transfer evaluation is pretty well baked, right? Everybody pretty much knows what they're doing. It's almost plug and play. Whereas work experience or something like that, there may be a greater need to clarify and perhaps improve process on that particular version.
Yes, and with our work experience, it's all up to the student to provide the documentation, and it varies from portfolios to resumes to actually bringing in samples of their work. So it's not just like, someone just comes in and says, hey, I've been a welder for 25 years. It's not that simple. You have to provide documentation and probably examples of your work. I must say, at this point, the majority of our transfer credit, as I call it, does come in from other schools on transcripts. Our work experience, as far as how much credit we give out, it's very minimal. And even test out of classes, most students choose to stay in the class for the mere fact that when they test out, they receive a grade of what we call a PR for proficiency. And if they transfer to another school, a lot of schools don't accept PR grades for transferability. So a lot of times our advisors will say, you know, it might be to your benefit to stay in the class and learn, you know, exactly everything and receive a grade.
So, you know, all manner of disconnects potentially inside of that, and you may decide that that's okay, right? And that's the downside of the opposite version, you know, may not be optimal. What you're describing is not at all atypical by any means.
So I think we should move to the next two steps, the final two steps here. These will take a little bit more time possibly and might be a little more complicated. So when we start on this, before we start on these next two steps, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be listing out activities, and then we're going to be drawing the relationship lines. And so I want to give you a context for this. There are two main purposes to do a relationship map. One is to make sure, it's almost a checklist, to make sure that you have all the roles covered when you then transfer this to your process map. And as a part of that, we want to start to line out what are the different activities that each of those roles do. So that makes it a lot easier than when you transfer your information and start your process map to have all of that information. The second thing is that by drawing the arrows, you start to establish some of the sequencing. And it will not be perfect on the relationship map. As I mentioned before, you may have some loops that occur. So we want to do just kind of a high level. And what that allows us to do is to sequence the roles on the swim lanes in an order that makes your map what I call cascade. If you think about, there'll be a lot of activities in the upper left-hand corner, and as you go from left to right across the map, then it'll cascade down so that you end with activities kind of in the lower right-hand. Otherwise, you get a real messy map where you have these long lines that cross back and forth all over the place. So we're trying to pull information together that enables us to format your process map in the most effective way. And that's really what we're trying to get out of this relationship map right now. The other thing is that when we do these next two steps, I would like to ask you to focus on your current state, you know, the inputs, throughputs, and outputs that you're currently doing today. And as a part of your assignment, you're going to go back to your organization, check that out. We'll talk about the assignment before we break up. But you're going to check the current state map out with your organization and make sure that that's correct. And then you're going to then start to incorporate your future state actions into the map as well. So, so right now, as we do these next two steps, focus mostly on the current state. And then I tried to explain a little bit about why we're doing this. So think about the different actions that are performed by each of these functions in the middle part of the map, and then list the high-level steps that particular function does. And just do the best you can at this point. And again, you're going to go back to your organization and add to the list and get more details. So on our little cutaway example here, you see that we've got, and I just chose to list some examples under registrar. I didn't do the other portions of the map. So in this case, the registrar requests information on PLA credit. They get a copy of the instructions on obtaining PLA credit, and they get a copy of the PLA credit form. And I'm sure there's other steps, but these are just examples. So if you would, please start to transcribe from your, you really didn't do this in the pre-work necessarily. We're asking you now to go through your map, and let's spend about 10 minutes on this. We'll check in maybe at 7 or 8 minutes to see how you're coming.
Jeopardy music. Okay, I want to be mindful of the time. We've got about 15 minutes left in our sort of allotted session, so shall we move on?
Yeah, I was going to check at about this point just to see how things were going. Are most people done with this part of the assignment? Then the last part that we want to do is the lines that I described. So I'll move to that portion. So you want to start to show these relationship lines between the different divisions or roles or departments. And again, this is not going to be perfect at this point in time, but it will help you later on as you start to sequence. The more important aspect of these lines is going to occur when you do your actual process map next week. So let's take about maybe 5 minutes till about 11:21 to do this, and then we'll answer questions and talk about the assignment and materials for next session.
So in the transfer process that was described earlier, right, sequencing is important. First, registration for the class must occur, and then you can pursue, going to the testing center, or something like that. I would guess that sequence may be different at some of your colleges.
We're going to spend about 2 more minutes on this. If anybody's having any difficulties, maybe send us a little note on the chat, and then we will do the wrap-up.
I guess my question is, how easy is this? I could imagine it being very straightforward, or I could imagine all sorts of arrows going in all sorts of directions back and forth. I'm interested to hear, as you go through this exercise, how straightforward. Okay, so Jenna's comment, doing this really shows how important the advisor's role is in credit for prior learning. Yeah, absolutely. Keep that in mind when we do the advisor session next month up at Moraine Park. I'm guessing there's a lot of arrows going to and from that advisor box. And registering lots of arrows.
You know, that's a really good point. Is I've seen this type of mapping, when you do the relationship map, you end up pinpointing like a particular role that just becomes central. And people maybe don't quite realize how central that role is. And so you'll get one of these throughput boxes that is just filled with ins and outs. So we're at 11:21, and obviously, you know, if you haven't completed these two steps and you need some more time, you're going to be taking this back into your organization and doing some work anyway. So, you know, it's not absolutely critical that it be finished now. I think we're mainly interested if you're having any problems to be able to ask us a question right now, and you can certainly email us and ask questions during the week if you have any problems. So let's just spend a minute. If anybody has any kind of a question or a problem that they need to have answered to go back and complete this work, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll move ahead in about a minute.
Either it's really easy or it's really hard.
Yeah.
People are busy scribbling arrows around. Probably both to some degree.
So what I'd like to articulate, and I recognize Joel may have some wrap-up as well, so I'll do my part right now and then turn it back over to Joel. You're going to receive really a bunch of information. You're going to get an assignment, next step assignment sheet that's been prepared by CAEL. That's going to be coming out to you. You'll get the process map blank template, just like you did this, the relationship map template. You'll get a PDF of the PowerPoint, and you'll also, it may come a little bit later, as Joel mentioned, but a link to the recorded session. And then you'll get a disconnect and action chart. It'd be a separate document that's sort of like the pre-work. And attached to that will be the appendix that I mentioned. I was looking at the current document, and it may be a little bit deficient, so I will update it'll be a glossary of terms on process mapping and symbols, and that will be attached to the disconnect and action chart. What we're asking you to do in this assignment, and you'll get this assignment sheet, and it's got places for you to fill things out, is to go back to your organization and share your relationship map with others. Or, you know, you may want to share it with, share the link or the PDF PowerPoint with people that were not able to attend, and just kind of update them and show them your maps. We want you to confirm all your sources of PLA that are listed on your map and include any new sources. So that's that transition from the current state to the future state. And then check with each department or role that you've included and make sure that all the steps are captured properly and accurately. And you need to add any new steps, again, as you move to the future state. Then identify ways that your process could either be streamlined or improved. And then ask kind of what issues or gaps exist in your organization that need to be resolved. And then start to document any process disconnects. You can start to use that worksheet to capture those. And then you can transcribe that on, you know, by number onto your process map as you do it in the next session. So that's kind of a wrap-up of what's going to happen next and what you're going to get. If I miss anything, Joel, please let me know. I would be very interested, because this is the first time that we've done the workshop in this kind of format where we're having you do work that we can't see on the screen. And as Joel mentioned earlier, we don't know exactly how hard or easy this might have been, is that I know I would really value, and I'm sure Joel would too, any comments on how well it worked or how it didn't work, and some things that we could do to improve the process so that as CAEL uses this format in future workshops, maybe with other consortiums, we have the benefit of your suggestions. So with that,
without a doubt, no ego here. We're all friends. We can take whatever criticism, and we can certainly take compliments. So please don't be shy about that. I guess I would also add to to Eric's comments, and he referenced it, but I want to put a finer point on it. As you are doing this, if you experience some difficulty or if you experience some aha moments and want to have a discussion, that's certainly available to you in between now and then. We're going to ask Yuta to traffic cop that, if you will. So if you want to make an appointment to either brainstorm or review what you've done or anything like that, we ask that you go ahead and contact her, and then she can make the appropriate connection to me, to Eric, to whoever else. But by all means, we don't disappear in between sessions. Recognize everybody's busy and has a lot going on. Just really would ask you to take even if you can carve out 15 minutes to be thinking and doing some of these interim steps. I think it will make a difference in making the subsequent session more useful. So please do try and spend some time, even if it's just a few minutes. You're all, I think, at different levels on this. So we've talked, gotten comments from some folks who have already sort of started down this path, and so there's no wrong door into this. But by all means, if you feel like you want a little extra attention to sort of get to that next level, please do, and to make a good decision about which sub-processes that you're going to focus on and which outcomes and inputs you're focusing on. Again, we're always happy to participate in those discussions and help make that happen. And really, that's all sort of we had for today. I think, looks like we pretty much held on to pretty much everybody over the course of this, so I think that's a good sign. And so, we can just spend the last couple of minutes and open it up to any sort of comments for the good of the order, questions, concerns, ahas, or anything that you'd like to share, but recognizing that we promised to keep you only for another 3 minutes, by all means, take whatever opportunity to, go on to your next meeting, or what have you, but look for an email coming from us later on today with that sort of homework packet for the next session. So that's really all I've got, but the floor is open. Okay, so hearing none, we're going to keep the line open for a few minutes, but you're officially excused, and we look forward to being with you again next week. Thanks very much, everyone.